System and Soul. We have a treat for you today. We've got Dr. Crawford Loritts. He has written many books. He has spoken to thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people over his lifetime. He is a sage. And the thing that made me absolutely want to have this conversation was his latest book, Leadership as an Identity. So those are all the words that you hear me talk about and love so much, all wrapped up into one. And I don't think I've ever read something that got so granular, kind of first principles. There's so many little nuggets in here. You've heard us talk on this podcast about being inwardly sound. And I think that he's gotten to so much of the root of it and articulated it very, very well. I will, disclaimer for this conversation is, it is overtly Christian. It is overtly biblical from a worldview perspective. I truly believe that truth is truth. And so if that's not your worldview, I think that you'll find something very, very meaningful and beneficial, valuable in this conversation. But I did want to give you that disclaimer up front. I hope you enjoy this as much as I do. So here we go.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go.
Dr. Loritts, welcome to the show. I think what you've distilled here is so critically accurate it's so well articulated at the heart of leadership, which the whole world wants to talk about all of the tangibles of leadership, right?
Right.
And what we do and what we look like and how we dress and, all that stuff. And your ability to cut to the heart of leadership in a way that I feel like I've been trying to teach, but everything you wrote made me feel inadequate because you've articulated it so well. And I've never done one of these interviews as a book report, but I just so want to dig in. Is that all right if we just go through?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. So let's plug the book real quick. It's called Leadership as an Identity: The 4 Traits of Those Who Wield Lasting Influence. And we're not going to give everything away because I want everybody to go buy it and read it, because this is one of those books that you read multiple times and give away a case. But the 4 things, I'm going to give those away: brokenness, uncommon communion, servanthood, radical immediate obedience. Those are 4 things that we don't normally hear when we're talking about leadership. So before we dig into what those all mean, how did you get to the place where you distilled your view of leadership so critically down to these 4 things?
Well, let's back up a little bit. And so back in the 90s, early 90s, I was asked to teach at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School as a visiting professor and to teach a course that was entitled The Essence of Biblical Leadership. So in preparation for that course, obviously, I read everything I could get my hands on that talked about leadership from a biblical or Christian perspective. And in varying degrees, they were all helpful to me. However, I began to scratch my head because some of the stuff that I read that purported to be distinctively Christian or a biblical perspective on leadership, I just frankly said to myself, I don't know that the Bible necessarily teaches that. So what I did was I just pushed that aside and I asked myself this question: what is it that every great man or woman of God that God entrusted his assignments to, what did they have in common? And that question is loaded with implications, and I'll come back to that in a second. And so I went through the scriptures and tried to be as unbiased and objective as I possibly could be, which no one is 100% objective. Sure. But as I read through the scriptures, I discovered that God had an amazing sense of humor. He had an amazing sense of humor. There is no certain personality profile that God uses for people who he trusts with his assignments or to execute leadership. There's no common background. There's no common education. They're all over the map. And but what I did discover, that every person that God trusted with his assignments had these 4 characteristics in common. And now these things should be true of every follower of Christ, but they're exponentially true of people that God entrusts his assignments to. And they are brokenness, uncommon communion, servanthood as an identity, not as a strategy. And then the last one is radical immediate obedience. And so that's how I came up with that, was looking at the scriptures, and then also looking at great men and women of God that God is using significantly, and who made it home before dark, and these characteristics are there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, like, the very first thing that struck me, and I had to like sit there and pause. I'm going to read it verbatim. For a Christian leader, brokenness is a dear friend and pride is the enemy. When you are broken, you realize you cannot do it in your own power. You cannot earn salvation on your own. You cannot walk with God on your own, and you cannot fulfill God's assignments on your own. And that idea of brokenness as a friend, how do we live that out? What does that look like?
Well, yeah. So God doesn't do double billing. Okay. God's plan and purposes for us is not to make us a better version of what we'd like to be. And we are born to give honor and glory to God, and everything that he does through our lives, it's all about him. And so A.W. Tozer famously said, the person that God will use greatly, he hurts deeply. I don't like that quote because I'm afraid it's true. And,
yeah, right.
Yeah, and it is true. It is true. See, brokenness is our friend in the sense that it's a holy handicap that keeps us dependent upon God. That we're always reminded that we are needy, and that sense of inadequacy and that sense of neediness is a wonderful thing. Now, I need to distinguish between brokenness and woundedness.
Okay.
You can be you can't be broken without having been wounded, but you can be wounded without having been broken. And sometimes we pass off woundedness as brokenness, but they're very different. You never want to give a wounded person a position of influence or leadership. If you do, they'll be using that platform as a means for their own personal therapy, and they're going to hurt a whole lot of people.
Wow.
The difference between a broken person and a wounded person is that they both may talk about their wounds, but a broken person talks about their wounds from a redemptive perspective. They talk about how Jesus has met them in their pain. And so it's a healthy thing. And unfortunately, wounded people can be self-deceived, and they can be talking about their wounds as a pathway to get attention or to get strokes or this kind of, and they're not over it yet.
Yeah.
God has not met them in it. But, and broken people are people who understand that, yes, pain is a part of the process, but pain is a reminder that I need God in all things. And,
You take, I was going to say, you take brokenness and very quickly within a few pages get to this idea of inadequacy, which we're in this world where everybody wants to say, you're enough, you got this, try a little harder, do one more rep, and you are it. And so I think if I'm hearing you correctly, that when you are broken, you realize your inadequacy, and it takes you to the one that fills you.
That's exactly right. My inadequacy, and this is not just a play on words, my inadequacy is an acknowledgement of my imperfection and the fact that I am not deity. I'm not the fourth member of the Trinity. I don't have all the attributes of God. And so let's stop kidding ourselves. Now, it doesn't mean we're not celebrating incompetence, but my inadequacy says that I set myself up for supernatural intervention. I set myself up for God's power to work in and through me. And so my inadequacy is not necessarily a lack of confidence, but it's a lack of confidence in my limited resources. But it's God confidence. It's God confidence in and I depend upon him in all things. And it's not about me. It's about him. And that sets you up to do things. God will do things through you that you could never dream or imagine. But dependence is the pathway to get there.
One of my favorite quotes that I'm trying my best to live into right now is, if you want to experience the supernatural, you have to let go of the natural.
Yeah, that's well said.
So hard to do. It's so hard to do.
Yeah, well, you just said it, Benji. The reason why it's so hard to do is that everybody's whispering in our ears about how gifted we are and how great we are and that we can do anything we think about and all of this stuff. And so, and it's a touchy thing. God wants us to be confident. Okay. God wants us to be confident, but it's a direction of our confidence. It's the direction of that confidence that will either make or break you.
Yeah.
If the confidence is all in me, it's gonna warp speed arrogance and entitlement, and that ain't gonna end well. That's not gonna end well. But if it's directed toward Him, it's gonna be bathed in gratitude and praise and worship. And by the way, it sets me up to do things that I can never dream or imagine. So yeah.
Hey, listener, we don't spend much time talking about ourselves on this podcast because we want to really be bringing you new ideas from outside sources for inspiration, for your own leadership, for your own organization. And we don't like talking about ourselves, but we're going to let somebody else talk about us for a second and brag on us. And I hope this gives you a little insight into what System and Soul is doing in the businesses that we're getting to work with.
I'm in love with this whole new framework because anything that I do is always about soul. And I've never been able to marry process and the soul of an organization together. And this is the first time that I feel like I have the ability to do that. I've been a part of the EOS journey for many, many years. I've worked in nonprofit. Of course, when I joined Orbis, I've been through several different implementers. And the evolution of the System and Soul framework is just brilliant for me. Because it's just, we have to care about culture. We have to care about these things called values. It's more than just some plaque on a wall. It's just not some talking point that we say to employees when they first start applying. Like it has to be, we have to live, we have to breathe, we have to show by example. And this is the first time that I've ever been able to really embrace that and then have a ground to stand on when I'm having really difficult conversations about the direction of our business. And it's been really exciting.
If you want to discover breakthrough in your business by becoming a System and Soul coach or finding one of our coaches to help your business, you can always learn more at systemandsoul.com. One of the things that I've learned is that the people who are a subject matter expert, and by that I just mean you've put a lot of time processing, thinking about this. That shapes your worldview, right? And it shapes the lens at which you see things. I'm going to put you on the spot. What are some of the things when you walk into a room of leaders that give you an indication, your radar goes up and say whether it's that they are still acted out of their woundedness, or that they are acting out of their redemptive brokenness? Are there things that you notice in people, in leaders right away? Yeah,
camouflage entitlement.
What is that?
Meaning that if you walk in a room and there's a bunch of leaders, and leaders are subtly talking about themselves and about what they've done and their accomplishments, and you get in these conversations that are really smokescreen for comparisons. That happens a lot with leaders. That happens an awful lot with leaders. And so, when you walk into a room and people are always kind of like looking for angles to talk about what they've accomplished and what they've done and all of this stuff. Now, there's nothing wrong with that on one hand. There's nothing wrong with giving God glory, to encourage people and say, God did this for me, and I'm sure He can do it for you. But you got to be careful. I tell younger leaders, limit your time in the green room. All right. Get you a shrimp and a bottle of Perrier, but get back out there in reality. Because that's the rare air. And so the lack of authentic gratitude. Gratitude is a huge thing, Benj. The older I get, gratitude is the expression of authentic humility. And by the way, gratitude is the expression of dependence. To be grateful means that I recognize that I'm needy.
Mm.
And once you lose that, I mean, you can play word games and all of this other kind of stuff. You drift toward entitlement. You start saying, I paid my dues. I deserve this. I went through my hard knocks and all of this kind of stuff. And really, you're the trophy in the trophy case. Okay.
Oh, right.
And
right.
yeah, so you gotta be careful. And then that's a half a step away from narcissistic behavior, man. And gratitude is the indication of authentic dependence and brokenness.
That's wonderful. I love that. You have this set up in the book, and then you almost go through a valley before the other side. And I love how you have this whole section on dealing with discouragement. We're talking about identity, we're talking about leadership, and right away you're like, hey, welcome to reality. What do we do with discouragement? So you address it. I'm going to read this sentence or two. I've had seasons in which I've had to fight my way through discouragement. But here's what I've learned. It's the decisions that you make when you're in that dark, discouraging place that will determine whether you will be branded by the discouragement or if it will be a redemptive, transformative experience. I think that there's, like, for me, when I read that, even going back to what we were saying about, are you broken or wounded? Are you wounded past tense? Or are you wounded present tense?
Yeah.
I think that we all have to go through something to even become a leader, to be worthy of being a leader. There has to be something that we've gone through previous to that. Is that what I'm picking up here, or am I misreading that?
No, you're not. You're spot on. See, leadership is incarnational, meaning that leaders have to be the portrait of the desired destination at which others need to arrive, which means that this is biblical leadership. It's beyond technique. It's beyond tools. It's beyond strategic language. And I'm not necessarily knocking all of that, because leadership development is very important.
Sure.
But in terms of leading people, character is everything. And character cannot be forged unless it presses through adversity and hard times and uncertainty. Proportion as a leader is your friend. Wisdom is the product of life. You can Google knowledge, but you can't Google wisdom. Wisdom comes by facing adversity and experience. You are credible. You're morally credible because not only are you saying right things, but you're striving to be the right things that you're saying. Now, that presupposes that you've been through some stuff, okay? And discouragement, every leader's going to be discouraged. Every leader's going to be discouraged. The issue is, how do you navigate that? What do you do? And like I said, I don't mean to sound like some locker room coach, but the truth of the matter is, it's your choices and decisions that you make when things are hard and difficult that will determine your demeanor, and it will determine your resolve, and it will determine whether or not, this stuff is going to stick to you. There's an old, and I've been quoting this now in recent years often. When you're born, you look like your parents, but when you die, you look like your decisions. Oh. And that's cold-blooded, and it's a hard truth. But if you're past 25 years old, you're shaking your head and you're saying, I don't like that line, but it's true. Right. So at a certain point, you got to decide, what am I going to do about the gut punch that I've taken? What am I going to do about it? How am I going to respond? And what are those choices? So,
Well, if I could sum up, one of my favorite authors is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And if I summed up like all of his work, I would say that the preferred future version of me, I can be that today if I believe what that future person believes and make the decisions that future person would make. And I'm there, right, like that. And that's what's hard, is believing those things and making those decisions. You talked about wisdom, you brought up wisdom, and now this is the part I've been jonesing to get to anyway, but you have this section on his resources. And one of the first things that you talk about in plumbing the depths of intimacy is, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask, and he will generously give to you. I sat in that one when I read it. It wasn't the first time I've read James 1:5, but,
right.
In this context, I sat with it for two reasons. One is because, first of all, there feels like there's a lot of times when I've prayed that prayer and the wisdom hasn't come. And then I remembered there's this, clip going around that I'm not going to do it justice, but you ask God for wisdom and he gives you adversity. You ask God for courage and he gives you, something scary. Right. I'm wondering, I'm like kind of connecting dots in my head right now as I've gone through this, that, he's going to give wisdom, but it might not be a free gift. You might have to earn it.
That's exactly right. And, when you stop and think about what is wisdom? Well, wisdom is the practical, appropriate, skillful application of knowledge. And wisdom is experiential. It's not just academic. It's experiential.
Yes.
It's the marinade of knowledge, Now, obviously, there are times in which God will give you great discernment and insight, and he'll give you wisdom without necessarily having gone through some hellacious,
Sure.
Right. But more often than not, what he allows to take place is, okay, Crawford, I'm going to give you wisdom. But before I give you this wisdom, you got to experience some consequences for some stupid choices that you make. And the gift of those consequences will be wisdom.
Yeah.
It's like my kids used to hate for me to say this to them as they were growing up, especially my sons when they were teenagers, and they'd make some kind of harebrained emotional decision that was just, and I would say to them, well, son, experience is not always the best teacher, but it is the only school a fool will attend. And so, it's all of these things. Yeah.
Oh man, you're full of these one-liners that hurt because they're true. In this resource section, I think like we could make our listeners pause for a minute, because you talk about the 4 jewels that God gives you, and you mentioned a throwback to Dr. Blackaby in here. But if we think about the 4 jewels from God, I don't think anybody would just naturally come to the same 4. We'd be thinking of like beautiful things, and you're like, no. Yeah. The first jewel is suffering, and the second one is personal struggles, and the third one is failure, which is interesting in its own, because you broke those 3 up when they could feel like the same thing.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the fourth being success through hardship. Why did that resonate with you so distinctly, and specifically as the 4 things instead of really just one?
Well, I think because I guess it's a little autobiographical. I mean, I resonate with those 4 things. Although you're absolutely right. I mean, they're more like they're more like 4 parts of the same thing, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they're intertwined, and not everything is meant to be surgically distinct. But what I was trying to say is that sometimes we look at leaders and we look at what's been accomplished in their lives, or what God has done through them, and then, we see the outward side, but we don't see the price that was paid. And what godly leaders do, they treasure how God met them in those dark moments. Now, I'm sitting in my study here at my house, and I've got a bunch of, stuff on my walls and this kind of thing. But if you would come in here, what you would think those plaques and other things represent, you might be surprised. To me, they represent something else. I remember the pain, or I remember the loneliness. I remember the stuff that I went through. There's a picture on my wall over here of me speaking at Soldier Field with 50, 60,000 men at a Promise Keepers event. And so most people would think, oh man, that was great. But you know what? I was at the point of burnout when I was there. And what that picture reminds me of is the gift that God gave me by another Christian leader who was there that knew me and got in my grill about the choices and decisions. And I look at that picture and I see the grace of God in saving me from doing
Wow.
some stupid stuff. So, you know, these are the things in your trophy case, right?
Yeah.
These are the things that you keep. Success through hardship, where God carried you. And it was hard, but you pressed through. God wouldn't let you turn around. He wouldn't let you give up. Well, those are the footprints that you leave in the sands of time right there. That's the stuff. And, you know, you never follow any leader. I tell younger leaders this all the time. Don't follow any leader who has not failed. Don't follow any leader that doesn't have some scars on them.
Yeah.
Because if you do, they're going to be riding too high in the water. There's not enough weight in the ballast holes of their souls that can handle blessing and visibility and all these other things. So God has got to put stuff in you. And, you know, and I'll say this too, and I'm sort of the passion of every leader. The passion of every leader is that their character is going to be greater than the platform that they stand on. And I'm not saying that that's always the case, but that's got to be your ambition. If that's not your ambition, then you're going to be leading out of your gifts, talents, abilities, cute phrases, turn of sentences, people that you know, contacts, and all of this stuff, followers on your X account or Instagram, and all of the fluff, which means categorically nothing. And you're not going to be worth following. You're just too high in the water. And that's why the Lord allows this pressure to be a gift to you. So you remember that God trusted you. He trusted you. And he carried your sorry backside through some hard, hard things, buddy. So don't let the glory stick.
First of all, thank you for sharing that Soldier Field story. What I heard when you said it is the trophy doesn't represent the victory. The trophy represents the sacrifice
Yes.
for what got it there.
That's exactly right, Benj. That's exactly right.
There's a generation of people that want the trophy, but aren't willing to sacrifice.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. See, greatness in God's sight is not visibility. We confuse recognition with greatness. Greatness in God's sight is faithfulness. Mm-hmm. And there is no faithfulness apart from opposition and suffering. That's what makes faithfulness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So I feel like you're in a class of great leaders of a generation. And one of my goals is to pass on some of the wisdom from your generation to the next generation. And so I would love, just in conclusion, if you have the microphone, you're speaking to the next generation of leader. If besides getting your book and understanding, but seriously, there's so many nuggets and just foundational, like first principles in here to go back to. But where do you start? Like you say, hey, I want to be a leader worth following. I want to be what this book represents. What would you tell somebody? Like, where do you begin on that journey?
Well, I'm going to quote something that doesn't sound so spiritual, but it comes from my mother. My mother said, good meat makes its own gravy. So the place where you start is not focusing on your gifts, not focusing on your craft, not focusing on opportunities, and not navigating your life. The very first place that you start is that you start with consistent communion with God. Your walk with God is everything. It is everything. And you have got to believe that. You have got to believe it. God's been hitting straight licks with crooked sticks. And the number of, how many gifted and talented people I've seen crash and burn in my life, who could preach the birds out the trees at the degrees and all of that stuff. You got to become worth following. And you got to believe that. And so the very first thing is it's your walking relationship with God. I mean, that sounds so very simple, but that is everything. That is everything. And let God orchestrate your life. You know, God doesn't have a speech impediment. You know, when God wants to use you, he'll come and get you. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about being lazy. No, you know,
Sure.
that. And I'm not talking about that. You stir up the gift, as Paul told Timothy. Look, buddy, you got to cause the blaze again, the gift that God's given to you. But you understand, it's not the gift that lights the fire. It's the God of the gift that works through you. And so, you know, don't get so cute that you wander away from dependence upon the Lord to self-reliance.
Yeah. And
you become an empty suit. You become an orator, or you become an actor, and all of that stuff. So really, it is your passion for God that is everything. Everything. And God will move heaven and hell to get you to where he wants you to be. And you don't want to be any place where God doesn't want you to be. Trust me.
Yeah.
You don't want to be there. And so that's where the blessing comes. That's where the blessing comes. And to realize also that, look, we stand on the shoulders of other people. And our aspiration should be to be the floor for the next generation and not the ceiling. Mm-hmm. And so we want to be people of character. Character is everything. It is everything. Character and integrity and godliness, that's all you bring to whatever you do in life. That's all you have. That's absolutely all you have. Yeah. So
thank you so much for your time, generosity, wisdom, for your voice to the next generation, for taking your scars from your years and turning those into guidance for people like myself. You're very, very appreciated.
Oh, Vince, thank you, man. That means a lot, and blessings on you. Thank you for the privilege here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Talk soon. All right. Okay. Blessings. Bye-bye.